Hello everyone, let me introduce myself. My name is Fadillah W.K. Arum. I'm from class B semester 6. Now I will explain to you guys about the word of second language. The term of the second language typically refers to a language that a person learns or acquires in addition to their native or first language. It is a language that is not the primary language spoken in a person's community or country of origin, but is learned for various purposes such as communication, education, work, or cultural increment. Multilingualism refers to the ability to use two or more languages. Some linguistics and psychologists use bilingualism for the ability to use two languages and multilingualism for more than two. But we will not make that distinction here. Monolingualism refers to the ability to use only one. And no one can say for sure how many people are multilingual. But a reasonable estimate is that at least half of the world population is in this category. Multilingualism is thus by no means a rare phenomenon, but a normal and common occurrence in most parts of the world. While multilingualism occurs in every country for a variety of social reasons, the distribution of multiple language is quite unequal. This motivation may arise from a variety of conditions, including the following first one is invasion or conquest of one's country by speakers of another language. And the second one is a need or desire to contact speakers of other language in economic or other specific domains. And the third one is immigration to a country where use of a language other than one at once is required. And the third one is adoption of religious beliefs and practice which involve use of another language. And the fourth, a need or desire to pursue educational experience where access requires proficiency in another language. And the fifth is a desire for occupational or social advancement which is furthered by knowledge of another language. And the last one is an interest in knowing more about people of other cultures and having access to their technologies or literatures.
Hello guys, I'm Yuneita E. So now I will explain about the nature of language learning. The nature of language learning refers to the process by which individuals acquire and develop the ability to understand, use, and communicate in a specific language. It involves various cognitive, social, and psychological factors that influence how a person learns a language. So, by the age of 6 months, an infant has produced all of the vowel sounds and most of the consonant sounds of any language in the world, including some that do not occur in the language their parents speak. If children hear English spoken around them, they will learn to discriminate among those sounds that make a difference in the meaning of English words or the phonemes, and they will learn to disregard those that do not. The understanding of how children achieve early mastery of language has changed radically in the last 50 years, mainly due to developments in linguistics and psychology. It has been suggested that the acquisition of a first language is largely the result of children's natural desire to please their doting parents with impatiently for them to say a recognizable word. Language learning is a complex cognitive process through which individuals acquire the ability to understand and use language for communication. It involves the development of various linguistic skills, including speaking, listening, reading, and writing. The nature of language learning encompasses both innate abilities and social experience. So the first one, the role of natural ability. Natural ability refers to the innate capacity that individuals have for language learning. It is often debated whether certain individuals possess a language learning gen, or if there are specific cognitive mechanisms dedicated to language acquisitions. While there is ongoing research in this area, it is generally accepted that humans have a natural predisposition for language learning. Such a predisposition must be assumed in order to explain several facts. The point A, children begin to learn their language one at the same age and in much the same way, whether it is English, Bengali, Korean, Swahili, or any other language in the world. Point B, children master the basic phonological and grammatical operations in their language one by the age of about 5 or 6, as not above, regardless of what the language is. Point C, children can understand and create novel utterances. They are not limited to repeating what they have heard, and indeed the utterances that children produce are often systemically different from those of the adults around them. Point D, there is a cut-off age for language one acquisition, beyond which it can never complete. And the last point, acquisition of language one is not simply a facet of general intelligence. The second, the role of social experience. Children will never acquire such language-specific knowledge unless that language is used with them and around them, and they will learn to use only the language used around them, no matter what their linguistic heritage. So social experience plays a critical role in language learning, especially as individuals progress beyond their native language and engage in second language acquisition. Language is fundamentally a social phenomenon, and it is through social interactions that individuals learn to communicate effectively.
First language versus second language learning. This brief comparison between first language and second language learning is divided into the three phases. The first is the initial state, which many linguists and psycholinguists believe includes the fundamental knowledge of the structure and perception of language, that is the learned head and start of first language or second language acquisition. The second phase, the intermediate state, includes the stage of basic language development. This includes the maturation change that occurs in what I call a child's grammar, and the development sequence known as the learned language or also interlanguage or EL. The third phase in the final state, which is in the result of first language and second language learning. Final language versus second language development. Initial state, first language built-in capacity. Second language, first language knowledge and knowledge of the world through interaction skill. Intermediate state, first language children grammar. Second language learns language, basic progress. First language repeating. Second language transfer, necessary condition. First language includes reciprocal interaction. Second language enter facilitating condition, attitude, feedback, interaction, motivation. Final state, first language native competency. Second language multilingual competency. In the initial state, while the initial state in children means for first language is most certain and innate capacity for language learning, it is no way certain whether such natural ability is part of an initial state in other lands for second language acquisition. Some linguists and psycholinguists believe that predisposition, the genetic makeup the children are born with for language learning, stay with them through life, and the difference in first language and second language learning outcomes are due to the other factors. Others believe that some aspect of the innate capacity that children have for first language persists when subsequent language acquisition, but the some aspect of the natural ability are lost while age. Still others believe that the tree is not innate capacity for language acquisition after childhood, and that later language are learned in a more similar way to how older lands acquire the areas of knowledge such as mathematics or history. Since is impossible for us to observe the mental capacity for language learning directly, the differing belief are based largely on theoretical assumption and tests by indirect methods, and individuals for different disciplinary perspective may disagree with, and for second language learners it occurs in age when cognitive maturity cannot be considered as significant factor. Second language learners and reach maturity level in their first language, and the maturity level is not language specific. Progress under the maturation must be involved to account for development in the SLA. There is general agreement that cross-linguistic influence or the transfer or innate knowledge from first language to second language is on the progress involved interlanguage development. Two main types of transfer that occur are the first, positive transfer, when an first language structure or roles in use in second language utterance and that usage in appropriate or correct and second language, and the second, negative transfer or interferes, when an B1 structure or role is used in AB2 entrance and to use it in input they consider an error. Introvert, first language and second language can be detected as for its accent, no speaker production, and prefers the most common and socially requested aspect of first language influence. English second language, which is impossible for a native speaker to produce. Concepts associated with adequate word knowledge are often too complex for adequate expression with needed abilities, but are less certain comparable in contents and tend to stimulate learning of second language vocabulary. For example, older children in immigrant families may enroll in U.S. schools with prior knowledge of academic subjects such as science and math. The last account to more reflects the expression of the U.S. curriculum, but many have the second language English condensed to explore what now. Required condition. Language input to learn is absolutely necessary for learning to take but please both first language and second language children also need interaction with others for first language learning to occur. In the contrast, while reciprocal social interaction generally facilitate SLA, it is possible for some individuals to active and moderately high level of proficiency in second language even if they only get input from no reciprocal source such as radio, television, or writing text. Facilitating condition while children first language learning also with interaction, and while the rate of first language development is not significantly affected by correction immature forms or by the level or motivation to speak, neither the rate nor the final level of development can be facilitated or inhibited by many social factors and individuals. The first feedback including correction of language, second language learning errors, the first talents including memory capacity and analytical abilities, the third motivation or need and desire to learn, and the last interaction to explicit teaching in school environment. And the final state in the result of first language or second language learning. The final state of first language development is by definition native language contents, while the learning of vocabulary and the inculcation of special regressed or such and formal academic writing styles can continue into adulthood. The basic phonological and grammatical system or wider no language children has around them or basically established by around 5 or 6 years age. On the other hand, the final state of developing second language again by definition is never fully native language competence, and the level provides they learn at different widely. Some less active, near native or native-like competence in second language along with native competence in first language but might stop and some point to make further progress forward learning goals in response to second language input, which result in final state which still includes example of first language interference of creative structure that driven from tools produced by native second language speaker, or a frozen state of progressiveness and facilitation in SLA. The complex of factors that contribute to different levels of final multilingual development is of major interest to both SLA theory and second language teaching method.
Hello everyone, my name is Fitri Ratna Sari. Now I would like to explain about logical problem of language learning. This question from the logical problems of language learning. The problem as it has been formulated by linguists relates most importantly to syntactic phenomena. As noted in the preceding section, most linguists and psychologists assume this achievement must be attributed to innate and spontaneous language learning construct or the process. This view has been supported by arguments such as the following. For the first one is children's knowledge of language goes beyond what could be learned from the input and what they receive. This is essentially the poverty of the stimulus argument. According to this argument, children often hear incomplete or unargumentical utterances along with grammatical input, and yet they are somehow able to filter the language they hear so that the ungrammatical input is not incorporate into their L1 system. For the examples, the word dada, which means father, many parents tend to their children to use the word dada to call their father, not using a word's daddy to calling their father. And the second is constraints and principles cannot be learned. Children's access to general constraints and principles which govern language could account for the relative short time it takes for the L1 grammar to emerge and for the fact that it does so systematically and without any divergence. And the last one is universal patterns of development cannot be explained by language-specific input. So, in this linguistic, input always consists of the sounds, words, phrases, sentence, and other surface level units of specific human language. For a long time, people thought the children when they learn about the language by imitating those around them. More recent points of view claim that children have an innate language ability. So there are three major arguments supporting these notions. And the next is children can using language in accordance with general universal rules of language even though they have not yet developed of cognitive ability and necessary to understand the rules. Therefore, we know that these rules are not learned from the dedication or imitation. I think that's all.
Okay, now we'll explain about frameworks for SLA. Okay, you can know that framework of SLA can be categorized as primarily based on linguistic, psychological, and social framework. The interest in second language learning and use dates back many centuries. CMC 30 2001, but this is only since the 2960 centuries that scholars have formulated systematic theoretics and models to address this. As I noted earlier, different approaches to the study of SLA can be categorized as primarily based on linguistic, psychological, and social framework. The important theoretical framework that have influenced the SLA process, which we will consider are listed right by the discipline with which they are primarily associated and sequenced according to the decisions in which they assign relevant academic prominence. Prior to the 2960, interest in L2 learning was tied almost exclusively to foreign language teaching concerns. The dominant linguistic model through the 1950 was structured aims. From Bloomfield 1933, which emphasizes the description of different level of production in speech, phonological or sound system, morphology, composition of words, syntax, grammatical relations of word within sentence, such as ordering and agreement, semantic meaning, and lexical or vocabulary. And the most influential cognitive model of learning that was applied to language acquisition at that time was Behoreven from Skinner 1957, which stresses the notice of habit formation resulting from CRR stimulate from the environments such as linguistic input response to the stimuli and reinforcement if the response result in some desired outcome. Repeated from
CRR, sequence or learn, or strong stimulate response pairing become habits. The intersection of the models from the descriptionary framework from the audiolingual method and approach to the language teaching, which emphasizes repetition and habit formation that was widely practiced in much of the world, at least until the 1980 centuries, and although it had not yet been applied to second language concerns, Vygotsky sociology in 1062 in English translation was also widely accepted as a learning theory by mid-century, emphasizing interaction with other peoples as critical to learning process. And this view is still influences in SLA approaches, which are concerned with the role of input and interaction. Linguistics there have been two focus for the study of SLA from a linguistic perspective since 1960, internal and external. The internal focus has been based primarily on the work of Noam Chomsky and his followers. It sets the goal of study as accounting for speakers' internalizing underlying knowledge of language and language competency, rather than the description of surface forms as in earlier structural relation. The external focus for the study of SLA has emphasized language use, including the function of language, which are realized in learner's production at different stages of the development. And the next is internal. The internal focus defers linguistic framework with an internal focus in transformational generative grammar from Chomsky 1957 and 165. The appearance of this work revolutionized linguistic theory and had a profound effect on the study of both first and second language. And the next from Chomsky argued confirming that the behaviorist theory of language acquisition is wrong because it cannot explain the creativity aspect of our linguistic ability. But he called attention to the logical problems of language acquisition, which we discussed earlier in this chapter, and claimed the necessity of assuming that children begin with an innate capacity which is biological endowment. And this framework was followed by the principle and parameters model on the minimalist program, also formulated by Chomsky. The specification of what constitutes innate capacity in language acquisition has been revised to include more abstract notion of general principle and constraints that are common to all human language as part of universal grammar. The minimalist program aids a distinction between lexical and description of different level of production in speech, phonological, for example, sound system, morphological is or composition of words, syntax, or grammatical relation of words within sentence, such as ordering and agreement, semantic or meaning, and lexicon or vocabulary.
The most influential cognitive model of learning that was applied to language acquisition at that time was behaviorization by Skinner 1957, which stresses the notice of habit formation resulting from CRR stimuli from the environment, such as linguistic input, and the response to those stimuli and reinforcement if the response results in some desired outcome. And the repeat CRR sequence are learners. The stronger stimulate response, pairing become habits. And the next point is external focus. The external focus, the most important linguistic framework contributing to an external focus on SLA, categorizes within functionalism, which dates back to the early 20th century and has its roots in the previous school of Eastern Europe. And the next is they differ from the Chomsky from works in unpacking the information content of utterance and in considering language primarily as a system of communication. Some of them emphasize similarities and difference among the words, language, and relate this to a sequence and relative difficulty of learning. Some emphasize acquisition as learn, a process of mapping relation between linguistic function and forms motivated by communicative need, and some emphasize the main learners have of structuring information in auto production and how this relate to acquisition and how this relate to acquisition. And the next is a process based on functional framework. The functional framework have dominated European study of SLA are widely followed elsewhere in the world. The next topic is the next point is physiological. There have been three focus in the study of SLA. From a physiological perspective is language and the brain, learning process and learning difference. The language and the brain, the location and representation of language in the brain has been of interest to biologists and physiologists since the 19th century, and the expanding field of neurolinguistics was one of the first to influence cognitive perspective on SLA. When a systematic study began in the 1960, Lamberti and 1067 generate great interest when he agreed that there is a critical period for language acquisition which has a neurological basis, and much aggregate research on SLA initially ground in this framework. The next is learning process. The focus on learning process has been heavily influenced by computer-based information processing or EP models of learning, which were established in cognitive psychology by the 1060 century. And the next is explanation of SLA phenomena based on this framework in full assumption that although it is a highly complex skill and that learning although is not essentially unlike learning other highly complex skill, because they have been especially productive in addressing the questions of how learners acquire knowledge of L2 and in providing explanation for sequencing in a language development. The possibility is a more recently developed framework which extends IP concept of learning and applies them to teaching second language. The next is connections is another cognitive framework for the focus on learning process beginning in the 1980 and becoming increasingly influential. And it differs from most other current framework for the study of SLA in not consider language learning to involve either innate knowledge or abstraction of rules and principles, but rather to result from increasing strength of associations or connections between stimuli and response. Because this framework considers frequency of input an important causative factor in learning. It is also providing a theoretical base for research on language teaching. And the next is learning difference. The focus on learning difference in SLA has been most concerned with the questions of why some learners are more successful than others. It arises in part from the humanistic framework within physiology, which has a long history in that discipline, but has significantly influenced second language teaching and SLR research only since the 1970 from C. Williams and Barton 1997. This framework calls for consideration of emotional involvement in learning, such as affective factors of attitude, motivation, and anxiety level. This focus also considers biological difference associated with age and sex, as well as some difference associated with aspect of processing. And the next is social sum of the framework. The social of the framework that I can categorize with a social perspective can also be considered linguistic, since they relate to language, form, and function. Some can also be considered cognitive, since they explore learning process or attitude and motivation. We will review them in this section because in addition to linguistic and cognitive factors, they all emphasize the importance of social context for language acquisition and use the language acquisition. There are two focus for the study of SLA from this perspective. The first one is microsocial and macrosocial. Microsocial focus, the concerns within the microsocial focus relate to language acquisition and use in immediately social context of production, interpretation, and interaction. The framework provided by variation theory and accommodation theory include exploration of systematic difference in learner's production, which depend on context of use, and they consider why the target of SLA may be different even within groups who are once still learning the same language. The next is from Vygotsky, ocular cultural. The theory also contributes to this focus, viewing interaction as the essential genesis of language. The next is macrosocial focus. The concerns of the macrosocial focus relate language acquisition and use to broader ecological context, including cultural, politic, and
educational setting. And the ethnography of communication framework extend the notion of what is being acquired in SLA beyond linguistic and cultural factors to include social and cultural knowledge that is required for appropriate use and lead us to consider second language learners as members of groups or communication with sociopolitical as well as linguistical bonds. I think that's all from the topic. The next topic can be explained by my partners.
For a variety of reasons, the majority of people in the world know more than one language. This first language is almost always learning effortlessly and with nearly infinite success. Second language learning involves many different conditions and processes, and success is far from certain. This may be at least partly because older learners no longer have the same natural ability to acquire language as do young children, and because second language learning is influenced by prior knowledge of the first and by many individuals and contextual factors. This chapter has identified a number of theoretical frameworks which provide the base for different approaches to the study of SLA that we will consider. All of the approaches address the basic what, how, and why questions that we pose, but they have different scores of interest and attention. Linguistic frameworks differ in taking an internal or external focus in language. Psychological frames differ in whether they focus on language and the brain, on learning processes, or on individual difference. And social frameworks differ in placing the emphasis on micro or macro factors in language in learning. Like the lens with different color filters used in photographing mirrors, these complement one another and all are needed to gain a full spectrum picture of the multidimensional processes involved in SLA. Even so, Max remains a mystery stimulating continued research. Language acquisition is the process of mastering mother tongues or native language which they carry out by an individual naturally, while language learning is the process of mastering language that occurs at a formal level, namely learning in class and being taught by a teacher. Based on the results of the study, it was found that the factors of age, environment, and habits, the structure of the first language, on the acquisition of the second language, and motivation greatly influence the acquisition of the second language. Thus, it can be seen that the first language affects the process of mastering the second language. The linguistic conditions of the first language is important for efforts to determine learning strategies that are thought to be effective by students in the context of transfers. Okay, that's all.
Hello everyone, I'm Yoksan Markus Lalay. Now I will mention 3 important points to think about in active learning. The first, why is using 2 or 3 languages so important? Why did you learn a second language? If you can only use one language, why don't you learn another language? These are the things you have to make a list of, discuss from the people around you. And the second, what is your experience in learning a second language and what are the problems you face? And the next, based on your personal experience, are you comfortable with either perspective on SLA? If so, what are the perspectives? And the last, what level of proficiency is required to have multi-language competence? And for future reading, you can search on Lightbound, PM and Spara N 1999, How Languages Are Learned, Oxford University Press.